Good morning, everybody. It's remarkable that I'm sitting in Vancouver in my home. It's dark, it's 11 o'clock at night, and everybody in my family is asleep. They went to sleep in the basement because they didn't want to be interrupted by the presentation. But so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to connect with you across time and space. And I want to thank Katri Kuka very much for the opportunity to be with you virtually on this occasion. What I plan to do is I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. At the moment I'm talking, of course, directly to you, but I want you to be able to share a PowerPoint that I have developed for the purposes of this conference. And also I want to go to the internet to actually demonstrate some of the digital storytelling work that we have been doing here at the University of British Columbia. So this is an exciting adventure, and I look forward to the journey with you. So I'm going to begin by sharing my screen, and I hope that you can see this. If you can see, first of all, I think I'm just going to, this is my, this is the, I'm going to put this down here, and I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, so I think I can see that you can see it. It's like a Russian doll, you know, one doll inside another doll. So I think you can see it, and if you wouldn't mind just lifting your hands so that I can see if you can hear me, and if you can see this, if you would lift your hands. That's perfect. Thank you so much. So as you see from the title here, I'm talking about identity, agency, and adult literacy in the digital era. And in many ways, we are living the digital era, because the fact that I can speak to you now just shows the power of that possibility. I'm also very aware that there are other parts of the world that don't necessarily share in the privileges that wealthier parts of the world have. So that you will see on this PowerPoint an image of a keyboard that was built in Uganda, northwestern Uganda, and shared with me by Willie Ngaka. And it's in a region of the country where people don't have necessarily running water and electricity, but instead of building little clay animals to share, they have built a laptop and a keyboard so that they can practice their skills. And when electricity comes to the region, they will be able to join the digital era. So what is so interesting in this digital era is that even when people don't necessarily have tremendous resources, they still are aware of this, the possibilities of the digital, and what this might mean for their opportunities. I do want to thank the Nordic Network for Adult Learning for inviting me here, and the Finnish Board of Education for helping to sponsor this event. You will see from my presentation that I've had a lot of connection with Scandinavia, and in fact I'm going to be visiting Norway in September this year, and I may even get to meet some of you at that time. So what I plan to do is to give just a foundational discussion of some of my foundational work on identity, investment, and imagined communities, and some of the more recent work on investment that I have done with one of my PhD students, Ron Darwin. I'm going to do a brief introduction to Storybooks Canada and global storybooks and demonstrate to you the work that we have done on Storybooks Norway, Storybooks Sweden, and Storybooks Denmark. We don't as yet have a Storybooks Finland, but we certainly would love to put a Storybooks Finland together if there is local interest, and also some people who may be interested in translation. So what I'm interested in, and have been for 2 decades, is how we theorize the complex relationship between the language learner and the social world, and the conditions under which social interaction takes place. Of particular interest to me is the extent to which social relations of power, such as racism, sexism, elitism, or homophobia, limit the opportunities for language learners to speak. If we have a look at some data, this is from some of my earlier work. This was data from Martina, who came from what was then called the Czechoslovakia. And she was an adult learner, and I understand that this conference is focused on adult learners. Martina says, I feel uncomfortable using English in the group of people whose English language is their mother tongue, because they speak fluently without any problems, and I feel inferior. So even though Martina was somebody who was a highly talented woman, multilingual, because she did not speak English as an immigrant in Canada, she felt inferior. What I've argued then is that every time language learners speak, they are not only exchanging information with their interlocutors, they are organizing and reorganizing a sense of who they are and how they relate to the social world. They are, in other words, engaged in identity construction and negotiation. In terms of a definition of identity, I argue that to define identity is how a person understands his or her relationship to the world, how that relationship is structured across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. And the issue of the future is very important for adult learners, and particularly people who immigrate from one country to another, or perhaps come as refugees. What are the hopes for themselves in their new country? And for many of them, the question is, what is the future of their children? And when I've discussed then the notion of communicative competence, it's not only that one needs to understand the rules of use, but also the right to speech and the power to impose reception. So the question is, not only can we speak, but are other people listening? When we speak, will there be reception? If we look, for example, at Mai, who was another of the adult learners that I worked with, who actually came from Vietnam, she was someone who was a highly motivated learner, but in fact dropped out of her class. And for me, one of the questions with adult learners is, why is it that some people do not remain in classes and do not connect with their classroom context? When we work with children and with youth, education is mandatory. So resistance takes the form often of disruption in class and perhaps disruption, on the playground. But the way adults actually express resistance is simply not coming back to class. So what I've done in the ideas that I've developed around issues of resistance and motivation is a concept that I have called investment. And I'm going to explore that with you in some of my earlier work. If we look at Mai, she said, I was hoping the course would help me the same as we learned in another course. but sometimes we only spent time on one man. He came from Europe. He talked about his country, what's happening and what was happening. And all the time, we didn't learn at all. And tomorrow, the Indian man speaks something for them. Maybe all week, I didn't write anymore in my book. So what I argued here is that I knew was a highly motivated learner, but she dropped out of that class. And what I've argued is that she was not invested in the language practices of that classroom. And I'm going to explore this in a little bit more depth. The notion of motivation often assumes a psychological construct. It assumes that individuals have unitary and coherent identities, and that motivation is a character trait of a learner. Whereas the construct of investment that I have developed is a sociological construct. It recognizes that learners are social beings with complex identities, changing across time and space, and reproduced in social interaction. I have argued that power is central to learning, and power is central to the construct of investment. So what do I mean by investment? I've argued that if learners invest in a second language, they will acquire a wider range of symbolic and material resources, which will increase their cultural capital and social power. And by symbolic resources, I refer to language, education, friendship, and by material resources, I refer to capital, real estate, or money. Let's go back and have a look at Mai's classroom. Why would Mai drop out of a classroom where she was attempting to learn English? In many ways, what I've argued is that the teacher, who may well have actually been a very caring and committed teacher, nevertheless tended to essentialize identity. In other words, identity was equated with ethnicity. You are from India, you are from Poland, you are from Peru, you are from Uganda. And seeing identity as something that is essentialized around ethnicity. But what I've argued is that identity is much more complex than this. Ethnicity is only one aspect of identity. One's age, one's gender, one's sexual orientation, one's religion, these are all very important parts of one's identity. And so when the teacher essentializes identity as simply where you come from, whether you're Indian or whether you're Ugandan, this does not do justice to the complexity of identities of our students. The teacher also focused on the past and not the present and the future. She wanted to know where people came from and their histories in their countries. That, of course, is a very important consideration. But for many people who immigrate to other countries or perhaps come as refugees, they are grappling with the present. They are grappling with how they can navigate their new society. And essentially, they are concerned about the future. What are the possibilities for themselves and their families? The third issue, if you recall, is that Mai said, all week I never wrote on my book. And so for Mai, literacy was a very important part of learning. Not only to be able to listen, but also and speak, but also to be able to read and write. So although Mai dropped out of class, I would argue that it was not that Mai was unmotivated. I would argue that Mai was not invested in the language practices of the classroom. Let's have a look at the future that Mai imagined for herself. she said in one conversation, in some of the data that I collected, after work today, when I was walking by myself on New Street, then I met Carl, who was going to the same school with me last course. I just talked to him about my job and the course I'm taking. He said to me, the good thing for you is to go to school. Then in the future, you would have a job to work in the office. I hope so. But sometimes I'm scared to dream about that. So mine was someone who worked in a factory, who wore the same clothes every day, who sat behind a machine and sewed clothes. But in the corner of the factory was a glassed-in area where people could wear what they wanted to wear the shoes they wanted to wear, and actually worked in the office, not on the factory floor. And this was Mai's imagined identity. This was Mai's imagined community. She says, I'm scared to dream about that. So when she actually attends a class and the teacher is talking about the past, she's talking about life in India or Europe or other countries, Mai does not see herself in those contexts. Her concern is with the present, her concern is with the future, and also, of course, the ability to read and write, which will give her access to a job in the office. So in my work, what I argue are, what the questions I ask are students motivated to learn a language? Are teachers motivated to teach a language? These are good questions, but I think one also needs to ask, are students and teachers invested in the language and literacy practices of a given classroom and community? Because interestingly enough, when Mai dropped out of that class, I've no doubt that the teacher would have asked herself, was Mai unmotivated? Or perhaps was there something that I did or did not do? And does this mean that my teaching practices or even my identity as a teacher is perhaps problematic? So that identities of students and identities of teachers are integrally related. I did a little study, just a small one, with my students, and in one of my classes on identity, and her name was Keely Ryan. I've published this in an article in a book by Gary Barkhuizen on language teacher identity. And Keely said to me that she had been struggling with the adult learners in her class, because in the session before she attended the course I was teaching, there were 25 adults in the class. And by the end of the class, only 9 students remained. But when she actually discussed notions of investment and learned about the construct of investment in the class, she wrote a paper in which she said that of the next course that she taught, there were 29 students in the class, and at the end, 25 remained. So I said to her, I found this quite remarkable, even though it was just a small study. So I asked her what she had done in the class that was different. And she said, I began by imagining what a good English teacher would look like for my students. I altered my practice to reflect what I imagined their idea of a good school would look like. Because what is very interesting is that when we work with students who come from different parts of the world, what constitutes a good teacher may be very different in China or in Brazil or in Spain. There may be very different experiences of good teaching. So what Keely did was that she learned from the students what they considered to be a good teacher through questionnaires and conversations and discussions. And she took on, in many ways, the identity of the teacher that was considered to be a good teacher for those learners. And as she did that, the students developed greater investment in the language practices of her classroom. What we have now is a new economic world order. So I've shared with you some of my earlier research, and the year is now 2015, and now we have moved now to 2019. We have a new economic world order with evolving theories of ideology, linguistic capital, and symbolic competence. We think particularly of the work of Jan Blommert and Pierre Bourdieu and Claire Cramsch. It's a world of technology, a world of mobility, a world where I can give a presentation from sitting in Vancouver to a community in Finland. And in fact, I see other people have joined the conversation from other parts of the world. So in 2015, Ron Darvin and I wrote a paper that was published in the Annual Review of Applied Linguistics. We were very honored that the paper won the TESOL 2016 Distinguished Research Award. It was called Identity and a Model of Investment in Applied Linguistics. The challenges for the 21st century, we said, is that in this new social world, there are new forms of social interaction and new ways of conceptualizing speech. So the question becomes, how do you claim the right to speak in the digital era? Claiming the right to speak in the digital area also speaks to the way power operates materially and symbolically in the digital era. Who has access to technology and who doesn't? And how do those who have access share the resources that they have with those who have much less access and fewer resources? We look then at the construct of investment in relationship, not only to issues of identity, which is crucial to our work, but we develop more fully the notion of capital and the notion of ideology. How do these connect? Identity, capital, and ideology. By capital, we refer particularly to the work of Pierre Bourdieu, where he distinguishes between economic, cultural, and social capital. Normally, we think about capital as economic, the wealth we have, the property, and the income. But if we think of cultural capital, it's a whole different kind of construct where we reference knowledge, educational credentials, and cultural forms. What cultural knowledge do we have that provides us with opportunities and access? And also, crucially, what about social capital? Who has connections to networks of power? Who gets invited to speak? Who is excluded? Who gets their first job? What provides that opportunity? So social networks and social capital are also crucial to issues of possibility and identity. If you think about ideology, which we define as dominant ways of thinking that organize and stabilize societies while simultaneously determine modes of inclusion and exclusion. How is it that people, the majority of people, may think in a particular way, in ways in which minority populations may disagree? Who controls the way people think, what ideas get shared, what ideas get put on the radar, which ideas are ignored, which ideas do not have access? So these are all ideological issues that we see at present on the global stage in many parts of the world, whether we're talking about United States or Canada or Britain or Europe? Who is organizing and stabilizing the way societies think? And what forms of resistance might there be? So in this new digital world, to what extent are language learners invested in the language and literacy practices of a given classroom or community? And this takes me to the area of digital storytelling and family literacy. I know that this conference is primarily interested in, of course, adult literacy, but what we've learned working with adults is not only are adults interested in learning for themselves, but they are very interested in the education of their children. So family literacy is a very important part of adult education. This takes us to the work that we have done in the African context, where people and organizations such as SADI, a South African organization in Johannesburg, has been working with communities across the African context to provide materials for children in the mother tongue. Because one of the issues that we have learned about language learning is that if children become literate in the mother tongue, it is a lot easier for them to actually shift to literacy in languages of wider communication. This, of course, is also true for adults, because as adults move and as refugees or immigrants to new societies, some are not literate in the mother tongue. And you will, I'm sure, have the experience. How can we actually teach them Finnish or Swedish or English or Danish if people are struggling with literacy in the mother tongue? So mother tongue literacy is a very important consideration in many parts of the world. And organizations like SADI have developed a website, the interactive website called the African Storybook, where on this website, there are over 1,000 unique stories, over 5,000 translations, and over 170 African languages, as well as English, French, and Portuguese. So you might ask yourself, what is the connection between the African Storybook and adult learning, and particularly adult learners in the Nordic context and in the wider Scandinavian context? Well, the connection is that these stories are all free and open access. So what works for literacy purposes in one context may well work in other contexts as well. So what I've done at UBC is that I've worked with a team of students and emerging scholars on adapting the stories from the African Storybook into and translating them into many, many languages of wider communication beyond the African context, as well as translations of new stories into other languages in the African context. So I'm going to just share with you some of the stakeholders here. You'll see in the top, I don't know if it's for you, the left-hand corner, Tessa Welch, who is the project lead of the African Storybook, and I are working together on a presentation. I actually serve as the research advisor of the African Storybook, and I have done that since its inception in 2013. In the top right-hand corner, you see Julia Tembe, who was one of my PhD students, and she was from Uganda, and she encouraged me to become active in the African Storybook. And what you see in this picture, this photo, which in fact I took myself a number of years ago, are many of the adult learners who are very keen and eager to enter into the digital world, but do not have the resources and the cultural knowledge of the digital. And yet, through education and through learning, they can enter into this digital community. In the bottom left-hand corner, you will see a picture of another PhD student of mine called Espen Strange Johansen, who is actually from Norway. And after he completed his PhD, which was a year ago, he actually got a position at the Norway Inland University, and we stay very much connected. And it's partly because of Espen, of course, that I'm going to Norway in September this year. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see Sam Andema, who is another PhD student of mine, who is now, he works for USAID in Uganda. So I just wanted to give you some sense of the community. There are many other people who are involved in our projects, in not only the African Storybook, but other digital storybook projects that have been spin-offs from the African Storybook. And this is what I hope to introduce to you during this session. So what we've done here is that we have developed a global storybooks project by translating stories for these African stories into languages in the global community, and also used as a framework the Storybooks Canada site. One of our concerns is to democratize knowledge flows between the global south and the global north. So often we find that information flows from the north, global north, to the global south. What excites us about the African Storybook is that the knowledge and expertise that has been developed in the global south can be shared much more widely with the global north and other parts of the world. So what I'd like to do is to demonstrate. I'm going to change gears. I'm going to move out of my PowerPoint, and I'm going to move into the global storybook sites. And I think I'm going to begin by showing you what we have developed with the Storybooks Canada site, and then I will take you to other sites. So what we have done is we've taken 40 stories from the African Storybook, all at a variety of different levels. And if you have your cell phones on you, you can just Google. Please feel free, everybody, to just type on your cell phones Storybooks Canada, because this was developed with a view to be used on a cell phone, because in most parts of the world, even if people don't have laptops, many people have cell phones or have access to cell phones. So I do hope you will take the opportunity to just Google Storybooks Canada. So what we've got, Storybooks Canada is a website, interactive website that takes 40 stories from the African Storybook, and we make these available with text and audio in English, French, and the most widely spoken immigrant and refugee languages of Canada. So the audio component of Storybooks Canada and Global Storybooks is crucial, because if a person is not literate in the mother tongue, they will have the opportunity to hear the language that they are familiar with, and this might actually help them to develop literacy in the mother tongue, as well as in English, French, or other languages of wider communication. So you'll see here that we can change the levels from, we have different levels, 1 to 5, with different levels of difficulty. And in the Canadian context, these are all the languages that we have translated the storybooks into, which have both print and audio, which includes English, French, Arabic, Bengali, Cantonese, German, Italian, Korean, Mandarin, and so forth. What I'd like to do is we are also working on an Indigenous storybooks project, because we're interested also in reaching out to the Indigenous communities in Canada, and we are also developing a global storybooks portal. So I'm going to take you to that portal right now. In that global storybooks portal, you'll see we've got Storybooks Canada. Now, we've already looked at Storybooks Canada. So what we can do for Canada, we can of course do for many other parts of the world. And so far, we've got these all in alphabetical order. We've got storybooks projects for Bangladesh, Brazil. We have Denmark, you'll see for those from Denmark in the audience, Germany, Ghana, Greece, Haiti, Hong Kong, Hungary, Jamaica, Japan, Kenya, Korea, Liberia, Mexico, Minnesota, Nigeria. Here we have Norway, Pakistan, Poland, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Sweden. You'll see Sweden, Tanzania, Uganda, the UK, Washington, DC, and Zambia. What I'm going to do is something that's I've never done before, so I hope you will bear with me, but I'm going to try to navigate Storybooks Norway, because I am hoping that, perhaps there are a good number of you in the audience from Norway, and I'm going to show you what Storybooks Norway looks like. So this Storybooks Norway, Espen has been a central figure in getting Storybooks Norway up and running. And what we see here is we've got, these are the languages that have been identified in the Norwegian context. Bokmål, of course, and Nynorsk, and we're still working on Nordsamisk. We've also got Arabic, English, French, Italian, and many other languages in the Norwegian context. And here we have the different levels that are available. What I wanted to show you here, because this is an adult education conference, there are a good number of stories that would be appropriate for adults. And so one of them, for example, is a story called Fire, one called Hair, another one called Decision, and another one called A Very Tall Man. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to pull up a very tall man, and I'm going to show you how the technology works. You'll see Espen, you'll see, because these stories are all Creative Commons, they are free and open access, but you'll know who actually wrote the story, who illustrated the story, who translated the story, and who also created the audio for the story. We see here that in this particular case, the language here, the Norwegian version, is Bokmål, and this is a level 2 story. Because the story is only 41 seconds long, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to play the whole story for you, so you can see, and I'm going to play it actually on autoplay. So I hope you enjoy the story, and then I'm going to show you how we can toggle into other languages. So let's listen to a very tall man.
En veldig høy mann. Hakka hans var for kort. Døråpningen hans var for lav. Sengen hans var for kort. Sykkelen hans var for lav. Denne mannen var for høy. Han lagde et veldig langt hakkeskaft. Han lagde en veldig høy dørramme. Han lagde en veldig lang seng. Han kjøpte en veldig høy sykkel. Han satt på en veldig høy stol. Han spiste med en veldig lang gaffel. Han reiste fra huset sitt og bodde i en stor skog. Han levde i mange år.
Okay, What we can do for those people who don't speak Norwegian, I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to change the language to English. So we move over to English. So what you see here is that the person who is reading the story is someone different. This is Darshan Soni, who's also a member of our team. You see that English is the language, and you'll see here that the translation, the English translation is a little bit longer than the Norwegian. What I want to show you here is we have the story now in English, a very tall man, but we can toggle now between English and Bokmal. We can also toggle to Nynorsk. There we have English and Bokmal, and I'm hoping that looks very similar. Let's try this one over here. What is our English version here? His doorway was too low. So by being able to toggle between English and a language between two languages, teachers can actually introduce two different languages to learners. And of course, there's also not only the English language in written form, but also in audio form. So let's have a look at the audio form.
His hoe was too short. His doorway was too low.
So for teachers, for example, who may not feel confident in their knowledge of English or their use of English, this may also be very helpful, for teachers as an additional resource. Teachers can also, let's have a look at another feature on the website, is that teachers can download stories in print version. And when they download those stories, they can download it in PDF format. They can download it where there is an image but no words, so that students and learners can create their own stories. They can download it with the words but no image, and autistic students could draw those images. They can download it in two different versions, so into a bilingual version in both English and Bokmal. They can print it out, in different formats. So this could be very helpful for teachers because learners would be able to create their own stories. I'm thinking back to Mai, who said, I haven't written at all in my book. So here's an image, and a learner would be able to write their own story with reference to a particular image. And this is what is also called a multimodality, that meaning is made not only through print, but also through image. What of course might also be very valuable is the possibility of reading with one's own children. So let me pull up, let's look at the Danish people in the audience, and I will go up to Denmark here. It may well be that a parent and a child could read a story together. Here we have a story I like to read, and a parent could actually could learn Danish, but also toggle between Danish and English, or Danish and other languages. So the notion of family literacy is also crucial, because a parent would be able to listen to a story and also and read it with his or her child. If you have, for example, refugees from Syria who are speakers of Arabic, one would be able to look at the story in Arabic and read the story or listen to the story in Arabic. Here's a story, in fact, about counting. So, of course, if a child is learning to count or an adult is learning to count, these stories might be helpful for them as well. But there are also more advanced stories for adults, because one of the concerns for adult learners is that they feel that they need access to what are called high-low texts. And I'm going to take you to, you can see as you advance in the stories, you will see stories that are for more advanced learners, and the texts are certainly more advanced for those learners. You can pick this up here, and you can see, for example, that the texts are longer and more complex. I think that I'm going to perhaps just end on looking at Storybooks Canada, because what we've done with Storybooks Canada is that what we appreciate is that teachers are very concerned about the curriculum and whether a particular innovation links to the curriculum. So what we've done in Canada is that we've aligned stories with the BC curriculum. And for those who might be interested, you may wish to align these stories with your own curriculum. So that, for example, these would be for children. There would be the name of the story, the theme, and the competencies that we've developed, that have been developed. But what we're also interested in is the concept of high-low texts. And this is highly relevant to adult learners, because adult learners need low they want high interest and low vocabulary texts. They don't want to necessarily read children's books. They want to read books that would be appropriate for their level, but would still be low vocabulary. So that, for example, these are for youth, not necessarily for adults, but for youth. So we see, for example, a level 1 story has a youth as a sample illustration from 6 to 14 years old. A level 2, a few sentences per page. You have a books for a 7 to 16-year-old. You've got The Day I Left Home for the City. I think this could also be, in fact, an adult story, which is a level 3 story. You have the Honey Guides at Revenge, or Magozwe would be more advanced. And now we're also working on identifying, as I've demonstrated to you, some of the adult stories that might be valuable for you in the Scandinavian context. This is a work in progress. We invite people to become volunteers on our project. And I do want to just acknowledge the amazing team that I work with. And hopefully I can take you to the team that I've worked with on Storybooks Canada and Global Storybooks. There you see Espen. Sarah Davidson is our Indigenous scholar. Asma Afreen, who did Storybooks Bangladesh. Michelle Gilman, Rahat Zaidi, Darshan Soni, Ingrid Schechter, and Liam Doherty, who is a genius at technology amongst many other talents. So I'm going to stop sharing now, because my hope is that that we might have some opportunity for some questions, and I'm hoping to open this up to the audience.